Hi again. So I have been asked to talk to you about district heating and the European energy transition. So that's really the story, I guess, of what we've been doing as an organization these last few years and what has happened as the European policy framework has evolved. A couple of quick words about Euroheat Power, so just so it's clear for everyone, we are the voice of the district heating and cooling sector in Europe. Our job is to deal with the European institutions, the European Commission, Parliament and Council. It's also our job to try and explain to our industry what's happening in Brussels and what it means, and to provide a forum for sharing, cooperation and so on. It's in that third context that I'm here this morning. First, a story, and I'm aware it's not the Serbian flag. But I like to use this to explain where we were a few years ago. When I started this job back in early 2014, we had, shortly after that, one of these periodic crises with Russia, where suddenly there's a problem of gas supply and a question of pipes being, or taps being turned off and citizens being cold. This always makes the European Commission completely frantic. And this case was no exception, and they decided to organize a big stakeholder conference on what to do about this, talking about the fact that actually if you have a crisis of gas supply or gas supply security, what you really have is a problem of heat supply. And cynically at the time, I thought this is a really useful opportunity for us, because we can come and talk about the fact that there are other ways to supply heat than simply from importing it from abroad. You can use district heating networks to take advantage of locally available resources in our communities. So in principle, this was really a useful opportunity to promote the message of what district heating can provide. The only problem was they didn't invite us to the event. It seemed to me they invited everybody else, but not us. And I made a few phone calls and whatever, and finally managed to get myself in the room. The only problem was then I noticed that all the other sectors had specific chairs and nameplates and so on, but not us. And the only place that was available was that of the Croatian government delegation, because they hadn't showed up. So I thought, okay, well, I'll sit down and take the opportunity to speak when it comes. The person chairing the meeting was a commission official, somebody I know well, so I thought, okay, well, he'll see me and I'll talk. The only problem is just before I had a chance to talk, he left and was replaced by another chairman who didn't know me. So when I put up my hand to talk, they said, oh, the Croatian delegation would like to make an official statement. Okay. I left that afternoon. I went home, took a long walk, and did a lot of thinking because I realized that basically our subject, heating in general and district heating in particular, were simply not on the agenda in Brussels. And we're never going to get anywhere as long as we were not a subject for discussion. So I started to work, and we have worked as an organization and as an industry since that day to position heating and cooling in general and district heating in particular on the EU policy agenda. Now, what is that policy agenda? Well, it's been going on about 10 years now. Basically, how to solve these three problems at the same time. How to deal with the problem of the environmental impacts of energy use, climate change in particular. How to deal with threats to energy security. How can we make sure we get access to resources that our economy needs? And third, how do we keep our economy competitive while at the same time investing in and changing to new and sustainable energy technologies. So this triangle of priorities and how to balance them, that's basically the driving force in energy policy in Brussels today. And the first generation of policies are now nearly 10 years old. 20% renewable energy goal, 20% energy efficiency improvement goal, 20% CO2 reduction by 2020. That's the first generation of energy policies, and we're sort of more or less on track to get there now. Now, more recently, we've been discussing a framework for 2030. But I don't want to dwell on that too much because I don't think it's very important. These are just incremental steps. The longer term destination is here in 2050. I started working in Brussels in 2006, and at that time 2050 sounded like a kind of science fiction date. Now it sounds more like the day after tomorrow, and as you know, in infrastructure and planning terms, it's nothing. And when you look at this is a few years old now. They were talking about 80 to 95% CO2 reduction by 2020, by 2050. I think these days we are starting a discussion in Brussels about the need to commit to 100% CO2 reduction by 2050 in light of the Paris Agreement and so on. And there's something even more important for us as an industry thinking about heating and cooling in buildings. Even in a future where we allow 15 or 10 or 20% CO2 greenhouse gas emissions to remain in the energy system, they cannot be in the buildings part. There are harder areas of the energy system to decarbonize. Airplanes, heavy industry, and so on. So when it comes to keeping our buildings at a comfortable 19 degrees or whatever, the idea is if we're serious about a long-term plan on climate change, we absolutely need to get to a building stock which doesn't generate CO2 emissions. Fine. Now, when the first discussions about this 2030 framework started in 2014, the European Commission published a paper about the broad situation and what needed to be done. In that paper, I counted 25 references to electricity and not one single word about heat. Nothing. Non-issue. And I think we have a lot of experts in the room, so this won't surprise anybody. But if you think about the way that we use energy, what we need it for, something like half of the energy that we use in Europe today is for heating and cooling, and most of it's for heating. So it's quite something to be talking about this and a total transformation and not actually say any words about heat. So we had a problem. Now what's the problem? Why do we need to talk about heat? This picture is taken just around the corner from my office in Brussels. Perfectly normal street, nice set of buildings, no problem at all. One problem: chimneys. This may not be the case in Belgrade, where district heating is more developed, but in Brussels, like in so many cities across Belgium, Germany, Italy, the UK, and so on, every single one of these buildings has a boiler downstairs, and every single one of them burns oil or gas for heat. And at the moment, there's no plan to do anything about this. There are something like 100 million fossil fuel boilers burning in Europe today. So back in 2014, 2015, I started to ask the European Commission. It became the main thrust of my job, and our job as an organization. What is Europe's heating and cooling policy? And the first answer I got looked something like this. And if you push them, these are the kinds of things they came up with. They wish people would dress more warmly in winter. Or maybe we could do everything with electricity, so we just need to put up more windmills and more PV panels, and the whole problem will be solved. Maybe. Or maybe we'll have a building stock that doesn't need any more heat. I go back to this street across from my office. Does anyone here believe that that street isn't going to be needing any heat in 30 years' time? Because I don't. And I think it's a serious distraction from the work that needs to be done in transforming the way that we do supply heat. Maybe Belgrade's going to look like this in 30 years. We won't have to worry about it, but I think it's probably going to look something like this. So we need to find solutions to this problem. How do we heat this building stock in a manner that is consistent with our strategic, environmental, and economic ambitions? So I had this conversation again and again and again with decision makers around Brussels. And I don't think any of them are here this morning, and even if they were, I'm sure they wouldn't mind. I have a dog at home and he's got epilepsy. Every morning I have to give this dog his medicine, and I've been doing this now for 8 years. And every morning I give him his medicine and he spits it out, and I put it back in and he spits it out, and we go through this every single day before I can have coffee. Trying to talk to people for the first time about heating and cooling and its importance to the energy transition reminded me quite a lot of trying to give this dog his medicine. They didn't want to hear it. It was difficult. Heat is messy and local and fragmented and awkward to deal with. But we don't have a choice for the reasons that I've mentioned. And around 2015, I got the impression people began to take the medicine a little bit. So this is the first thing. The overarching European energy strategy right now falls into a framework called the Energy Union. And when that document was being prepared, this is the kind of flagship picture for what Brussels is doing on energy. Just before the document was published, we got a draft version, and somebody very, very senior had written in, add something on district heating. And this is the culmination of 3 years of advocacy work. But they did it. And that little line in that big paper led to some important progress. So in 2015, the European Commission organized the first ever proper high-level conference on the future of heating and cooling in European energy policy. We had maybe 700 people, policymakers in Brussels, in the room to talk about this subject. They even let me give a keynote. And it was for me an important sign that progress was being made and things were starting to change. They then published the first ever European heating and cooling strategy. If you have a few minutes, it's worth a read. It's only 20 pages or so. It's a high-level document setting out some general points. And some of the important points that it makes are here. First, that heating and cooling demand isn't going to disappear. So we can stop thinking about that. Of course we can build better buildings, of course we can renovate, but we're still going to need lots of heating and cooling in 2050. That our current reliance on obsolete fossil fuel boilers ultimately isn't going to be sustainable. That it is possible and desirable to shift to a reliance on renewables and waste heat. Waste heat's an important idea I'll come back to in a few minutes. And finally, that district heating, by virtue of its ability to supply large amounts of low carbon heat to dense urban areas, will have an important role to play. And around this time, we saw a kind of surge of interest in Brussels in district heating. So I got this slide from them. What they're calling new areas. You'll be surprised to learn that district heating is a new area, but in Brussels it is. CHP, thermal storage, waste heat and cold, integrated heat planning, thinking about things, thinking about where we put things so that we can take heat from where it is available to where it's needed. So in principle, this should be a very exciting time. We should be feeling positive and enthusiastic and so on. In practice, I've had a very stressful 12 months. And why? Because in 2016, the European Commission started work on something it called the Winter Package. And the Winter Package, now usually referred to as the Clean Energy Package, is a whole bunch of new legislation. And I have noticed in our industry that new legislation tends to make people nervous, especially when there's going to be lots of it. So this Winter Package was referred to as a volcano of legislation, a tsunami of legislation, and my favorite one, the Death Star. This Death Star finally came at the end of last year. It's 4,500 pages worth of legal text. I think by now I've actually read most of it, which has made me a very boring person. The aspect of this that I'd like to focus on just for a couple of moments, because there's way too much to describe here today, is a new directive on renewable energy. This renewable energy directive, for the first time, really singles out, first, heating and cooling, and second, district heating, and provides at least the beginning of a regulatory framework for those things. And that's something completely new. Now, why did they have to do this? Well, the answer is pretty simple. If you ask people in Brussels about district heating and cooling, one of the things that they say is, it's very interesting, but from our point of view, at least at European level, there's no regulatory framework. It's a kind of Wild West, which explains the cowboys. And this makes politicians very, very anxious. A sector which doesn't have regulation is difficult for them to promote. District heating makes people react in very different ways. You know, there are things which even when they're not very bad, even when they're quite bad, they're still pretty good. Chocolate's one of those things. Pizza's one of those things. Even so-so pizza's pretty good. So we'll limit ourselves to chocolate and pizza, but the idea is the same. What is district heating? It depends who you ask. If you go to Sweden or Denmark and talk to people about it there, they see it positively. If you talk to people about the Swedish model of district heating, they see it positively, but not everybody sees it that way. And I've gone into meetings in Brussels with an official where someone has said to me, well, my grandmother lives in Poland and her district heating doesn't work very well at all. And people have this type of picture of it, right? It's old-fashioned, it's cold, it's inefficient, you have to open up the windows to cool down and so on. And that's a real problem. And this is not a kind of district heating that people can promote. politicians won't push people towards this. They want to push people away from things like this. This renewable energy package, this renewable energy directive, is designed to help us solve that problem. It's designed to put in place a regulatory framework that works. And I'd like to talk for a second about what it is that Europe is actually trying to achieve here. So basically, the message from Brussels is they support district heating in principle, but their enthusiasm for our technology is absolutely not unconditional. They're asking for some assurances from us in exchange for their support. And what is it that they're worried about? Well, they're worried about a few things. Of course, they're concerned about the environmental credentials of district heating. Where does the fuel come from? Is it renewable? Is it sustainable? Is it low carbon? They're very concerned about the situation of consumers. Am I stuck as a consumer in a contract that lasts for 100 years that I can't get out of? Can the district heating company do whatever it wants about prices? There is a natural feeling of monopoly around district heating, and it makes people nervous. And I think that we have to kind of accept that our business model and sales pitch to customers and to politicians cannot be just let us do whatever we want, it's fine. You cannot have that. You cannot be a kind of regulatory black spot on a map. We need to be open about that. But what we're doing at the moment is negotiating the terms of this legislation in such a way that it works reasonably. It should be possible to establish proportional safeguards. And I'll give you a specific example. This proposal talks a lot about access of third parties to district heating networks. So when the original proposal came out, it said, if you have a district heating network and if you have a third party which is producing some heat, that third party should be able to sell their heat not only into the network, but directly to customers through the network. Now, this has made our industry a little bit anxious and uncomfortable because they want to retain control of the management of the network. They're worried about their ability to technically integrate sources of different temperatures, different pressures, and so on. And so this last few months has been about negotiating the terms of this new legislation such that it does what it's supposed to do, that is promote better district heating, more efficient district heating, more sustainable district heating, without compromising the business model of the operators. And that's our job, to try and find that balance. I have to say, I think our industry has no reason to be afraid, and we have no reason to be excessively conservative. When I look at the whole of Europe and the heating market, it looks like this. It's not a very sophisticated chart, but it's that simple. We have almost none of the market across Europe. District heating provides 12 or 13% of heat. So I think we shouldn't be trying to maintain the status quo. We shouldn't be trying to keep things as they are. We can be quite disruptive in changing this market and growing our share in this market in Serbia and elsewhere. So I think we can be open and confident. You know, I go back a few minutes to that awful, depressing district heating picture. There's another picture of district heating, and it looks much more like this. One where district heating takes advantage of all these different resources that are available in all of our communities. One that runs on lower temperatures, one that is more digitized. Good district heating, something that politicians can get excited about, something which allows us to run a sustainable business while providing value to our customers. So I'll wrap up by saying these four things. First of all, for the first time, I have the sense that the European Union is excited about district heating, sees it as something that we want to move forward with. That's going to mean more support, regulatory support, but also financial. But as I said a few minutes ago, this enthusiasm, this love, it's not unconditional. We have to be the best version of ourselves. It's got to be good district heating, evolving district heating, better district heating. But we can do that. We can change, we can improve. And I'm quite confident about the role that this industry can play in the next 20, 30 years as we move towards 2050. And I'm quite confident about prospects for our business and yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul, for this interesting presentations. Do you have any questions, any comments? One, please.
Thank you for a very nice and very interesting presentation. I didn't hear one word about heat pumps.
Would you like to?
Yes.
Yeah. No, that's easy. I think that there's been kind of historically this idea that heat pumps were competition for district heating or an alternative to district heating. I don't see it that way. We don't see it that way. First of all, once you get outside the city and below a certain level of density of demand, I think the heat pump is going to be the natural solution to replace the boiler. So already there's a huge market there for heat pumps. Second, we see more and more this emerging idea of using large heat pumps to supply the district heating networks. If you have, you know, a colleague was just mentioning to me that there's very, very cheap electricity here at night because demand is extremely low, obviously. In other countries, what is already starting to happen, where you have that same problem, is they are using that surplus electricity that they have at night to power big heat pumps, which then supply the district heating, which means district heating is simply providing cheap storage, helping balance the electricity grid, helping make the whole system more efficient. So, no, if you didn't hear about heat pumps, it's just because I'm a little short on time, but we're very enthusiastic about the technology and the way that district heating and heat pumps can work together. There seems to be one more.
Yeah, we should be there. One question more.
Yeah, okay. I would like to ask something about, you didn't mention anything about that is combined. I mean, district heating and building, so PP, public-private partnership. I see it is here the kind of habit or history that district heating just likes to be spread and bigger and bigger. And exactly it is important to have energy efficiency, reduced loads on the buildings, implementation on buildings when the loads are reduced, then renewable and cost-effective possible to implement on buildings, and that is contribution to also to district heating, because district heating that can with the same capacity supply much more buildings. I would like to hear your comment.
Yeah, so I completely agree. When I talk about good district heating, I mean district heating which functions energy efficiently within an energy efficient system. So, you know, when I showed you that picture of the heat market today and said we have 12% of it, our goal as an industry and our business model, I don't think should be to try and maintain artificially high levels of heat demand so we can just keep selling more and more and more heat. That cannot be the future for us. The future for us needs to be selling less heat to more people. So improvements in the building performance, which reduce heat demand, aren't a problem. That's not something we should be afraid of. That's something we have to embrace. Where the building is better, it's easier to use lower temperature sources. It's easier to use waste heat, it's easier to use renewables. So good buildings are not a problem. On the contrary, they can help support the evolution of this sector. So I think these two things go hand in hand, and I lose absolutely no sleep at night about the improving performance of buildings. It's a really good thing and something we should welcome.
Evo još jedno pitanje, kolega.
One question more.
One question more.
I'm from Poland, and I can tell that this is the view that
Please, loudly.
we have.
Glasnije,
Louder.
Glasnije, speak up.
Okay, so I'm from Poland, and we have the same view as you showed. And the government helps to lower the heating demand, so they help to with loans and investments into the insulating buildings. So the heating demand was lowered, and the heating plants had to do something with this heat. So they were heating the river, Vistula, which changed the environment. So not always investing in insulation is good. That's my comments for the district heating.
What's the question?
It's common.
You don't have any question. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.